Hebrews chapter 12, starting with verse 1 and 2. But as I was saying last week, we started the new series, hashtag Go series. And as I was laying in the bed, I kept hearing the words, on your mark, get set, go. On your mark, get set, go. And I just couldn't shake this. And I just kept seeing like this race. And I was like, man, God, what are you trying to say to me right now? So as I really started to look deeper into what on your mark, get set, go was, I know some of y'all are like, man, that's stupid, bro. How did you not know what that meant? I knew it meant to start a race, but I didn't really know what on your mark meant. So I started to look it up, and when the announcer yells on your mark, he's telling you to get in your lane. And when he's saying get set, he's saying, man, get in starting position and get ready to run the race. And when he says go, obviously that means take off. It means go. And as I started to think, just thinking about the season that we're in right now as a church, and how so many churches all across, well, pretty much all churches everywhere, were forced to close their doors and to get outside of the four walls. And we look at what God is doing in this season right now. And man, this is a season where God is just telling his church to go, right? So as I started thinking about it, it's like, man, the Lord put it on my heart, and he was telling me, man, when I'm saying on your mark, and I'm saying get in your lane, and I'm saying get into starting position and get ready to run, that if we do not get in our lane and we're not on our mark and we're not ready to run the race, that we're going to miss the race, because there's a move of God that's about to take place, that I believe is about to take place. And if we're not ready, we're going to miss it. And I don't want to miss it. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 2 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. So I was preparing this sermon, I was thinking, I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, and we used to have field day. I know most of y'all remember what field day was, right? Everybody in here had field day in their school. So that was like the most exciting time every year, is when we would have field day. And I couldn't wait for field day, because I couldn't wait for my dad to be able to come to field day, and I would get to show off at everything. Most of the time I lost everything, but I'd be like, my dad's going to be here. I'm going to beat everybody on there. You know what I mean? And so I couldn't wait for my dad to come out. And I remember they had the 50-yard dash. I remember the 50-yard dash. And I remember lining up, and when they would say on your mark, get set and go, get set, go, I remember thinking, I'm going to run this just like the Olympic runner. So when they say everybody on your mark, like I got down into my little running position, like on the ground. I'm like, oh, my dad's here. I'm gonna burn all of y'all. And I had my face just facing down, looking at the ground, thinking that like if I look at the ground and I get low like these Olympic runners, not knowing Olympic runners look up, they don't look down. So I hear on your mark, get set. My dad's like, go, David, go, David, go. So I take off running. I get about 4 or 5 steps and I face plant. Like there was no bouncing back from that. And I remember getting up. I had this big like pavement scratch, like scab all on my face, like completely scarred my face just from that moment right there. And I remember getting up from that race feeling so defeated. My dad's like, keep running, keep going. I'm like, for what? I'm like, I am not about to run this. I'm not going to go to the finish line. There's no point. Like everybody's already there. They beat me. And my dad was yelling at me, telling me that I needed to finish the race, right? Saying it doesn't matter if you get last place, you need to finish the race. And so my dad literally forced me to continue walking and to continue to finish the race. But I learned something about racing that day and about running. That running isn't just about how fast you can run, but it's also about position, right? And so as I thought I was taking this Olympic position, taking my starting position, and I'm getting low to the ground like this real runner, what I didn't realize is that I also, he's over here. What I didn't realize is that I also had what I was looking at, and what I was focused on also determined whether or not I was going to make it to the end, and what my destination was going to be. And since I was focused on the ground, that's where I ended up, on the ground. And so today I want to talk about position. When we say on your mark and we say get set, we're saying get into starting position. And so I want to talk about a few different ways that we position ourselves. And first, we have to position ourselves to hear the call. We think about an athlete and we think about a runner that is waiting to start a race. He's positioning himself to hear the announcer yell, go. And I want to talk about a few ways we position ourselves to hear the call. First, we got to eliminate outside voices. Think about a runner. Think about him waiting to hear the call to start the race. A runner's not going to be focused on what the people on the sidelines are saying and at the same time wait to hear the call of the race. Galatians chapter 1, verses 11 through 17 say, "Dear brothers and sisters, I want you to understand that the gospel message I preach is not based on mere human reasoning. I received my message from no human source and no one taught me. Instead, I received it by direct revelation from Jesus Christ. You know what I was like when I followed the Jewish religion, how I violently persecuted God's church. I did my best to destroy it. I was far ahead of my fellow Jews in my zeal for the traditions of my ancestors. But even before I was born, God chose me and called me by his marvelous grace. Then it pleased him to reveal his son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles. When this happened, I did not rush out to consult with any human being, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to consult with those who were apostles before I was. Instead, I went away into Arabia, and later I returned to the city of Damascus." So we think about Paul, man. Paul was just this. He was a expert builder of the faith. That Paul was this. He knew what his race was. He knew what his lane was. That Paul said, "Man, I've been appointed to defend the gospel and the good news." Because as soon as they started building the church, they had all of these different people and different snakes coming into the church and trying to put these religious rules on people and telling people that they had to be circumcised and they had to follow all of these Jewish customs and basically trying to put burdens on the Gentiles that were never meant to be placed on them. And so Paul spent his whole life just defending the gospel, right? And he said, "Man, I want you to understand that the gospel message I preach is not based on mere human reasoning." He said, "I received my message from no human source and no one taught me. Instead, I received it by direct revelation from Jesus Christ." And so, man, I think about that, man. Like, how blessed am I that I didn't grow up in church? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with growing up in church, but what I learned about God and my relationship with God was not based off of what man taught me. That Paul said, "Hey, man, look, I want you to understand that the message I preach is not based on human reasoning, and I received my message from no human source." He's saying, "Man, I received the message that I have directly from God himself, that man didn't teach me what I know about God." Not saying that we shouldn't have men that teach us about God, but he's saying, "Man, look, God, I have direct revelation about everything that I teach about God." Say, man, forget what you think you know about God. And forget what you heard about God, man. Paul is saying, man, you need a real revelation from God so that you can actually run the race that was placed before you. What he said, "Man, you know what I was like when I followed the Jewish religion, how I violently persecuted God's church. I did my best to destroy it. I was far ahead of my fellow Jews in my zeal for the traditions of my ancestors," man. Paul saying, man, you know what it was like when I was part of the Jewish religion. He said, man, my zeal was far beyond everybody, that I was persecuted. I was murdering Christians and believed that I was actually doing a service to God. Like, that's what Paul believed. That was his zeal. He said, man, look, when this happened, I didn't rush out to consult with any human being, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to consult with those who were apostles before I was. Instead, I went away into Arabia, and later I returned to the city of Damascus. He's saying, man, look, when Jesus revealed my call to me, when he revealed himself to me, he said, man, I didn't rush out to consult with anybody. He said, man, I went into Arabia, and later I returned to the city of Damascus. Man, I went on my own. I didn't rush out to tell anybody what God was doing. We got to eliminate distractions. In order to eliminate our distractions, we have to identify our distractions. If we want to hear the call, we got to eliminate distractions in our life. And there's so many different things distractions could be. Could be relationships. Could be social media. It could be video games for some of us in this room. Like, if we were to keep it real, some of us are hooked on video games. Look, Max, I'm talking to my son right there. He's over there like that. Now, for real, like it's necessary for us to identify what our distractions are so that we can get rid of our distractions, so that we can set boundaries in our life that we know if I do this, this is going to distract me from hearing what God is trying to say to me. I remember that when I first got saved and I was single, every time I would start to get fired up for God, it would always be some kind of woman would show up in my life to try to pull me away and to distract me from what God is doing in my life. Like, let's keep it real. Like, for some of y'all, that's what it is. For some of y'all, it's relationships that you keep ending up in the same situations and you're distracted because relationships are a distraction, right? Social media, that's the worst. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you. If I get on Facebook, I'm not putting it down. If I find one funny video, I'm gonna keep on clicking down to see the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And the next thing you know, I got an hour and a half went by, and I'm just sitting there feeling like my soul is literally drained. Like, for real, y'all ever seen the meme where it's like dude is holding his phone and it looks like his soul is getting sucked into the phone? You ever seen that? Like, that's what I feel like if I continue to watch social media, and it's a distraction from what I really need to be doing. One of my points, a distracted Christian is a vulnerable Christian. 1 Peter 5:8 says, stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Some translations say, man, be alert and of sober mind. He's like, man, look, like you need to stay alert, that you need to not be distracted. You need to recognize that you have an enemy. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And he's saying, man, if you're not on your guard and you are not out, if you're not looking out for the enemy to come and devour you, then he's going to come and devour you. A distracted Christian is a vulnerable Christian. Not only can we be distracted by toxic things, but we can also be distracted by the greater good. Luke chapter 10 is the story of Mary and Martha. Verses 38 through 42 says, as Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught, but Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. And what's crazy is, as Mary and Martha being sisters and both of them being women, they both should have been in the kitchen preparing a meal, because that's what women did back in biblical days. And so what Jesus is saying, so when Martha's coming to Jesus and he's saying, man, it's not fair that I'm doing all of this work and my sister's here, like she should be helping me. Can't you tell her to come in here and help me? And Jesus said, man, look, you're worried and upset over all these details. He said, but man, there's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary's discovered it and it will not be taken from her. What Mary discovered is that her alone time with Jesus was more valuable than any other thing that could be given to her. And in life, we'll find ourselves distracted even by the greater good, that we'll commit to doing all these different things, even things that are good, even ministry opportunities, and we can get distracted from what God is actually calling us to do right now in our lives because we just want to do anything. And so it could be good things that distract us away from what God is calling us to do and distracting us from the race that we're supposed to be running. So it's important that our alone time with Jesus becomes more valuable than anything else in our life, because it's in our alone time with Jesus that we're going to hear the call, that he's going to tell us where we need to move next. He's going to tell us where we need to go next. If we're not having that time, then we don't have anything. It's my second point. Create margin for alone time with the Lord. Matthew chapter 6, verse 6 says, but when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you and pray to the Father in private. Then your Father who sees everything will reward you. And then my next point is revelation is found in solitude. So we see Jesus in Matthew 6, and Jesus, man, he modeled that. He modeled always constantly withdrawn from the crowd and drawn near to God, withdrawn from the crowd and drawn near to God. And it's crazy because he was 100% man, but he was 100% God. And Jesus had to know every time the crowd would press in on him, he would perform miracles, signs, and wonders, and he would meet the needs of the people. And then Jesus would always withdraw and go to a place of solitude to reconnect with just him and the Father. And what's crazy is the disciples never had to ask Jesus. They never had to say, how do we cast out demons, or how do we perform miracles, or how do we do these signs and wonders? They never had to ask Jesus that. What they asked him was, hey, Lord, teach us how to pray. Because they knew that Jesus' power came from his time in prayer. And revelation is found in solitude. We need to pray for ears to hear. Proverbs 20, verse 12 says, ears to hear and eyes to see, both are gifts from the Lord. We always see that in the Bible, that it's constantly talking about ears to hear and eyes to see, ears to hear and eyes to see, ears to hear and eyes to see. Because those are gifts from the Lord. That's something that is not natural. It's not natural for us to hear the voice of God. It's not natural for us to see his fingerprints in our life. It's not natural for us to look out at creation and see it as beautiful as it is. That's something that God gives you, that when we're saved and we come into a relationship with him and we spend time with him, he opens our ears and he opens our eyes to start to see his fingerprints in our life. And that's something I remember just even when I first got saved, stepping outside and looking up at the stars and just being just overwhelmed at just the beauty of everything that God ever created. But somehow, somewhere down the line, I lost that. You know what I mean? Like we lose that. Like we get into this walk with God and we receive this touch from him in this relationship with him. And we're just amazed at everything. We see his hand in every area of our lives and in all creation. And we can just see it all. But somehow we get distracted and we lose that. But we can find it again. We can have that. And I believe right now in this season, as we can see, God has been removing so many distractions. It's so evident that he's shut down everything. And so many of the distractions have been pulled out of our lives right now. We have never had a better opportunity as a church to grow close and grow strong in our walk with him. As a church to get out and be the hands and feet. As a church to get out there and actually meet the needs of the people. There's never been a better opportunity than right now in this time in history to be the church. Secondly, position yourself to answer the call. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5 says, this is a trustworthy saying. If someone aspires to be a church leader, he desires an honorable position. So a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live in his home, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? And so, in order to position ourselves to answer the call of God on our life, the first thing that has to be in order is our home and our household. That's the first thing that has to be in order. He said, man, look, he said, man, if you want to be a leader, like you want to be a person who leads people, you want to be a person who is as seen as somebody who people want to follow. He said, man, that's an honorable position for you to desire. He said, man, but look, your life has to be above reproach. He said, you must be faithful to your wife. You got to exercise self-control. You must live wisely. You got to have a good reputation. You got to enjoy having guests in your home, and you got to be able to teach. He said he must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He got to be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? A lot of us are waiting on God to give us the call. God, I want to hear you tell me to go into ministry. God, show me what I'm called to do. Show me what I'm created to do. You don't know what you're called to do. The first thing you're called to do is to have your home in order and to lead yourself well, then lead your family well. That comes first and foremost. We can't pursue what God has for us if we ain't got that in order, because it's going to pull us back Pull us back, pull us back, pull us back. The greatest asset in my life is my wife's support. Like if it wasn't for my wife always saying, I'm behind you, no matter what you choose to do with my family, I'm behind you. That you got my full support. If you're saying God is saying to start a church, then I'm behind you. If you're saying that we need to move, then I'm behind you. If you're saying that we need to sell this, then I'm behind you. That anything that I ever decide to do, my wife is always behind me 100%. And I could not be pastor in a church if my wife was not behind me. Because if there's friction in my home, and if my wife is against what I got to do, then I can't pursue God, because the two are one. We get married and the two become one. So if we're not fully united, then I can't pursue the calling on my life, right? My first calling is to be her husband. Her first calling is to be my wife. And if we don't got that in order, then the rest of everything doesn't matter. Because then it goes from us, then it goes to our children being out of order, and then it goes just down, 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 all the way into our ministry. We can't have a ministry and pursue what God is calling us to pursue if our households are not in order first. Secondly, we got to remove anything that slows us down. Hebrews chapter 12:1, we talked about it last week, says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. And that's so many different things that can be. I'm not even going to talk about what those things are. But as we speak about that, as I say that, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. Since we're surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. We all got something that we can see in our mind right now that is slowing us down from running the race that God has placed before us. We all got something. There's something in each and every one of our minds. If we say, how come I am not giving this everything that I got? And how come I am not out there running the race that God has placed before me? We got that one thing that we know is slowing us down from doing what God has called us to do. And he said, not sin. He said, especially the sin that trips us up so easily. But when he's talking about weights that slow us down, he's talking about everyday, ordinary things that we allow to weigh us down. For some of us, that's friends that we need to walk away from and let go of because they keep pulling us back down. That's weights that we are carrying that we're not supposed to carry. And it's slowing us down from running the race that God has placed before us. People say that they tell me all the time, man, you forgot where you came from. Man, you done changed, man. You done changed up on me. You dang right I done changed, bro. You know what I'm saying? I ain't forgot where I came from. I'm going back to where I came from to pull people out the pits that want to come out the pits. But I ain't got time to keep wearing a bunch of my homeboys around my neck when I'm trying to run a race that God has placed before me. And I'm sick and tired of people who only take away from my life. Y'all need to get sick and tired of people who only take away from your lives. You got to make room for the people who want to add to your life. And we can't have those people who add to our life if we want to be surrounded by people who constantly just take away from our lives. We got to make room for them, man. Some of those, that's weights, man, that are slowing us down. We got to train before the race. 1 Corinthians 9:25-27 says, all athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I am not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. Look, he say, man, all athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. Look, he said, man, I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should do. Before we ever run the race, we got to train outside of the track. We can't just expect that we're going to show up to the race that God placed, that God is placing before us. And we're not at home and we're not training in our home lives. We're not getting in our prayer closets. We're not getting on our knees and praying to God. We're not spending time in the word. We're not praying for ourselves. How can we go out and lay hands on other people and pray for them if we ain't praying for ourselves? And we ain't spending time in the presence of God, giving him everything that we got at home. What makes you think that we can go out and actually do what he has called us to do? Then we're just empty vessels. We're walking around as empty vessels, asking for God to pour oil out on people when we're supposed to ask God to fill us with oil before we ever go out and think we can anoint somebody else. He said, man, they're disciplined in their training. He said, man, look, I'm not just shadow boxing. Like I ain't just throwing random punches around for nothing in the room. Like I understand that I'm doing this because this is what I'm called to do. And I recognize that I have an enemy. I'm not just shadow boxing, that every time I get into my prayer closet and I go to war, I'm going to war against an enemy that is real. That I'm not just doing this for no reason. Third, we got to position ourselves to run with others. Galatians chapter 2, verses 1 through 2 says, Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem. This is Paul saying, Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas. I took Titus along also. I went in response to a revelation, and meeting privately with those esteemed as leaders, I presented to them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. I wanted to be sure I was not running and had not been running my race in vain. And Paul's saying, man, look, I've already been preaching this, but I'm hearing about these other apostles, and I want to go and make sure that I present to them the gospel that I'm already preaching. Why? He said, because I want to be sure that I'm not running and haven't been running my race in vain. Because Paul understood that his relationships with the people around him were important. One of my points, if they can't run with you, they will never follow you. If people can't run a race with you, they will never get behind you and follow you. And as leaders, if we're talking about, man, God, I want to become a leader. God, I want to lead men, or God, I want to lead women, or God, I want to have a ministry, or I want to do something great. If you can't run with people next to you, they will never run behind you. And it's important that we learn that our relationships around us are vital to the ministry that God has called us to do, because none of us are called to do ministry alone. Not one person in this room. We're saying, man, position yourself to run with others, man. We're talking about running a race. Yeah, I know, like we're talking about Olympic races. They're all running and competing. Worldly races, they compete against each other. But when we're talking about the race that God has placed, the race of the kingdom, the race to win souls, that is a race that we all run together. Different lanes, but we are running for the same purpose, and that's to win souls to the kingdom of God. We got to be intentional about building relationships, because in this world and in the times that we live in, it's easy to walk past somebody and say hi or say what's up, and then never be intentional about actually making true relationships. That's why last year we said we're going to devote ourselves to meeting together, right? Remember? We went to the Acts chapter 2. Last year we said we're going to devote ourselves to meeting together, to sharing in meals. We're going to the apostle teacher. We're going to go back to the Acts chapter 2, and we are going to be intentional about building relationships. And I said, hey, my house is open. Anybody wants to come to my house, keep coming to my house. Like, let's do cookouts. Let's do this. Let's do that. And we were very intentional about creating relationships and building relationships last year. And I spent more time with friends last year than I have in my whole 7 years of ministry. That's sad. That is sad, because even still, I feel like I should do more, and I should be more intentional about building relationships, because it's easy just to say what's up on social media, because we're all living our own lives. We got our own problems, our own worries, our own cares, our own relationships outside of ministry and coming together as a church. Like, and it's easy to not truly build relationships. But that's something we got to be intentional about. You know, even the leaders that I have in my life, I'm intentional about calling them when I don't need something, just to say what's up, just to check in. Hey man, I'm just wanted to check in with you. Why? Because I need to be intentional about keeping those relationships healthy and let them know, like, I'm not just in your life or part of your life because I want something. You know what I mean? Because I know how easy it is to say that I have a relationship with somebody, that I'm somebody's friend, but we're not actually really friends. You know what I mean? We got to be intentional about building relationships. Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through 48. We read that for the offering, but I want to read it again. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders, and all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared their money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. And we see right here that as they did this deep sense of awe came over them all. And they performed many miraculous signs and wonders. But you know what, man, aside from that, like we see all of this good stuff that happened. They sold their property and possessions. They shared money with those in need. They worshiped together. Like we see this, all this good stuff that we see right here. But you know what's crazy? Them same people that they formed them communities with, that was the same people that were drugged through the streets with them. That's the same people that were witnessed them, that had to witness each other being stoned to death. That's the same people in that same community that were thrown in prisons, the same people that were being crucified. That's the same people. We see all of this good stuff, but that good stuff led to a family of believers that were willing to walk through fire with each other to spread the gospel. Look at all the tragedy, man, that has happened. You know? How many people, man, just in the past 3 weeks, we done had 3 people that I know. 3 people that I know overdose and die. Right? We were never meant to go through this life alone. And unless we worship together and unless we do these things together, like we're not just family because we come into this room and we hear a sermon together and we sing worship music together, that doesn't make us a family. Like we say we come together as a family, but true family is the people that are there when nobody else is, right? That's the people that are going to come alongside you and say, man, you need that, you don't have that. As a church, we're going to come. As a family, we're going to come. We're going to make sure that you have what you need. That's what makes us family. In order to build relationships, we have to learn to love one another. John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35 says, so now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Is Jesus telling him, man, I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. How did Jesus love them? He sacrificed his life for them. When he walked this earth, he served them he said, man, he took the position of a servant. And he had just got through washing their feet and doing all of these things as he led up to them. Jesus saying, man, love me just as I have loved you. They didn't truly understand how much Jesus loved him until he went to the cross and he died for them. Well, how is it? He said, man, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. That when the world looks at us, when they see the love that we have for each other, that should make them want something. That should be what shows them that we belong to God because we love each other properly. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, talks about it. What is love? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love keeps no record of being wrong. It endures all things. That, all of these, it goes through this whole list of love, right? And he talks about, man, if I had all the gifts if I had the gift of prophecy, I could speak in all unknown languages. If I could do all this and I could do that, but if I didn't love others, it would be nothing. See, if I even sacrifice my body, like if I sacrifice my body for you, but if I didn't love you, it would still be meaningless and worth nothing. And he lists off all these things that sound like things, like if somebody sacrificed their life for me, that seems like they love me, right? But no, man, he said, man, love is patient, it's kind, it endures all things. So he's saying, man, and then he said, man, when I was a child, I thought, I spoke and I reasoned as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. So when he's saying love is patient, right? And love is kind, and he's going through all of these things, he's giving us the opposite of what an immature Christian looks like. He's saying, man, so when I choose to love somebody in spite of how they aggravate me, that when I say that you're my brother or you're my sister, even though you offended me last week, when I choose to forgive you, when I choose to not keep record of every time you wronged me, that shows. He said, man, when I was a child, I thought, I spoke, and I reasoned as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. He said, man, it's our love for one another that shows the world that we're actually his disciples. And fourth, I don't know, do you got any pads or anything you put on there? Cool. My fourth and final is we have to forgive ourselves. If we want to run the race, or we want to start the race, we got to forgive ourselves. self-condemnation is a weight you can't carry into this race. It's a couple of different scriptures that the Lord kind of put on my spirit as I was preparing. The 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. A lot of us have been stuck and unable to move forward in our lives because we refuse to forgive ourselves. We'll forgive all these other people that hurt us and betrayed us, and we can continue to let people back into our lives to backstab us and burn us down, and we can continue to allow somebody else to destroy us, but we just can't find it inside of ourselves to forgive ourselves. Sometimes it's the hardest thing to do, is to forgive ourselves for the things that we have done. Psalms 103:10-12 says, he does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. And that should be good news to us. That God doesn't deal with us according to our sin. Like he isn't giving us what we actually deserve, because even if we think that we don't deserve the penalty of death, or we look at our lives or we measure our lives by other people, like no matter what, we still are deserving to die into judgment. But for the grace of God, that he sent his son to die on the cross so that we didn't have to walk around in guilt and shame, and that we didn't have to receive the penalty that we actually deserve. Philippians 3:13 says, brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead. We want to run the race. We got to forget the past. And we got to start walking towards what lies ahead.